Between the First Battle of Saratoga on September 19, 1777, and the Second Battle of Saratoga on October 7th, the British and rebel armies that faced each other in the Hudson River Valley spent most of their time strengthening their positions. The British, under General John Burgoyne, constructed a series of defensive positions known as redoubts a few miles to the north of the rebel fortifications at Bemis Heights by cutting down trees and stacking them in parallel lines that they then filled with rocks and dirt. The rebels, under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, meanwhile, extended their defenses to the west. They also used trees, but rather than stacking them, they placed them on the ground with their branches pointed towards the enemy, a defensive feature known as an abattis. Because they were a specialized unit, Edward Haymond and the rest of Daniel Morgan's Rifle Corps were largely exempt from these duties. What they were not exempt from, however, was becoming the center of a growing struggle between Gates and Arnold for control of the rebel army. Shortly after the First Battle of Saratoga, Arnold learned that Gates had not only not mentioned his contributions to the battle in his report to Congress, but that he was taking the Rifle Corps from Arnold and placing it under his own command. In a rage, Arnold confronted Gates directly and, in the words of one witness, an argument of high words and gross language ensued. In response, Gates ordered Arnold confined to camp behind the defenses on Bemis Heights, and that's where he was when Burgoyne renewed his attack on the rebels' western flank on October 7th. He didn't stay there long. According to Major James Wilkinson, the same man who witnessed the argument between Gates and Arnold, as soon as Arnold heard that the British had begun an attack, he started riding around the camp, drinking freely and betraying great agitation and wrath that he couldn't take part in the combat. Eventually, Arnold's emotions got the better of him, and he defied Gates's orders, riding to the front lines to command the rebel defense himself. When he arrived, he first attempted an assault on the redoubts at the center of the British fortifications, which were commanded by General Alexander Lindsay, 6th Earl of Balcarres. Unfortunately for the rebels, Arnold had inserted himself in the battle at a particularly inopportune moment, and had chosen to attack the strongest point in the British defense. The rebel troops in that part of the battlefield, commanded by General Enoch Poor, had the momentum on their side, but had fallen into disarray. So, Arnold ordered Poor to halt them and have them reform, which gave Balcarres' men enough time to prepare for a new attack. When the rebels did renew their assault in the position, they failed, but it didn't dampen Arnold's enthusiasm. According to Wilkinson, Arnold was waving his sword around with so much excitement during this part of the battle that he accidentally hit one of his own soldiers in the back of the head with the flat of his sword, which would feel something like being hit with a baseball bat. The man recovered and managed to keep fighting, but by the time he realized who had hit him, Arnold had already given up on his efforts to take the Balcarres redoubt in favor of joining Morgan's riflemen in an attack on a redoubt held by Hessians to the west. Morgan and his Rifle Corps had started off the battle in the center, right where Arnold ended up when he rode out to the front lines. But, upon examining the British lines, Morgan chose to swing his men around to the west in order to attack the British flank. By the time Arnold got there, the Rifle Corps had already been fighting for quite some time. The soldiers they faced were Hessian Jaegers, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich von Bremen, who, just like Morgan's men, were armed with rifles. They used those rifles to deadly effect, keeping Morgan's troops at bay until Arnold's arrival. Once he joined with Morgan, Arnold took command of a detachment of 15 or 20 riflemen and attacked the eastern side of Bremen's redoubt, while Morgan and other rebel infantry under General Ebenezer Learned assaulted it from the front. This flanking maneuver, combined with superior numbers, allowed the rebels to take the position and force the Hessians to retreat. The Hessians left their commander dead on the ground behind them, while Arnold himself received a wound in the same leg he had been shot in earlier in the war. With their western flank now vulnerable, the British were forced to retreat, and on October 17th, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army to Gates in the town of Saratoga, 8 miles to the north of the battlefield. The Continental Army's victory at Saratoga eventually convinced the French monarchy to support the colonial rebellion, which in turn helped the rebels win the war. Without the victory at Saratoga, the colonies might never have gained their independence. And without men like Edward Haymond, the rebels might never have won the victory that made that independence possible. Arnold never got the credit he thought he deserved for his participation in the battle, and his resentment eventually culminated in his decision to switch sides in 1780. For his own part, Edward Haymond served in Morgan's Rifles until the middle of 1778, when he transferred back to the 8th Pennsylvania Regiment, which was tasked with protecting Pittsburgh from Indian attacks in the west. He left the Army in 1779 and returned to what was then Monongalia County, where he died in 1820 at the age of 65. He is buried in Grafton, in what is now Taylor County, West Virginia.